Hi, everyone. Welcome to orientation. Whether you're joining us from inside of the US or from the other side of the world, on behalf of the International Students and Programs Office, also known as ISPO, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Emily Stewart, and I am an International Student Advisor here at ISPO. Go to the next slide. All right, so a few housekeeping items before we begin today. First, you may have noticed you're on listen only mode. So you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Next, we are recording. So this webinar will be posted at iwebinars.ucsc.edu. And then lastly, please use the Q&A box to get your questions answered. Even if we're not able to answer them today, through the Q&A during the session or at the end, we'll do our best to make sure we provide answers by updating our coronavirus FAQ page for newly admitted students. All right, so let's begin. We're happy to welcome you today to our session on working in the United States for graduate students. And I want to introduce my colleague, Pauline de Guzman, who is our Manager of International Student Services. Pauline?
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. My name is Pauline Erla de Guzman, as Emily stated. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I currently serve as the Manager of International Student Services here at ISPO. Alongside 20 other advisors here at ISPO. Emily is actually one of our lead employment advisors. So please feel free to utilize the Q&A chat as Emily has explained here today throughout the session. Emily's our lead advisor for employment, so she can help answer any questions. And then of course, at the end of today's session, we'll reserve some time to answer any questions live. All righty, go ahead and jump in here. So for today's agenda, we'll be talking about the different types of employment during and after your graduate program, eligibility timeline, when can you start working, and then what kind of work authorization might you need. We'll also talk about some resources and just planning tips when considering working in employment during your program. Throughout the session, you might see a couple of these boxes pop up saying, what would you do? It's just an engagement tool for us. So if you would like to engage, answer the question, you can go ahead and use the raise hand function on your Zoom toolbox and let us know what you think. All right, so look out for those. Okay, so let's get started. Employment is a really big topic for international students. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, but whenever we're thinking about employment, thinking about working in the US, internships, training, ways to really enhance your academic program here in the US, I like to go over the W's of working in the US. So who, what, when, where, and why. This is really important because it'll help you to understand how to do this correctly and to consider all of these factors when it comes to working in the US. So who do you need authorization from? Here in the US, you are here on a student visa, right? And so your primary goal and purpose while studying is to study full-time and complete your program of study. However, employment is a benefit for the F1 and the J1 visa. And so when you want to apply for a benefit, you will need certain authorization. It's important to know first who you need to get this authorization from so that you can plan ahead, contact that individual, apply for such benefits ahead of time. So knowing who approves the kind of work authorization you need is number one. Two, what kind of proof or what kind of authorization do you need? So depending on if it's off campus, on campus, during your program, or maybe after your program, the kind of work authorization might be a Form I-20, it might be a letter, it might even be an EAD card from US Immigration. So knowing what you need to start working is really important. And then also knowing the kind of work authorization. We'll go over all of those kinds today, so you'll be able to differentiate what the proper kind you'll need is. But this is a really important thing to note before you start exploring work. When? Depending on when you will begin your work, it also might tell you what kind of work authorization you will need and who you need to get the authorization from. Excuse me. There are different types of work authorization that you can engage in during your program. And there are also specific ones that you can engage in after your program. So knowing which one to apply for depends on when you are going to be engaging in this internship or work. Another factor, where? Where will you work? Will it be on campus or off campus? Depending on location, it will also tell you when you can begin working, what kind of authorization you need, and who you need to get this authorization from. So as you can see, they're all connected. Okay. And the last one, why? Why are you going to benefit from this experience? And is it related to your major? So there are certain types of authorization when it comes to work that need to be related to your major. Some do not. Okay, so let's talk about all of these W's working in the US so that you understand what options are available to you and also timeline. And again, as a reminder, please do utilize the Q&A feature in the chat here or in the Zoom panel here. Okay. Alrighty. So employment eligibility. Before you accept any type of employment, you need to make sure that you have proper eligibility and work authorization, okay? There are, again, as I've mentioned, various types of employment during your stay and study here in the US. And they're differentiated between the ones that you can engage in during your program and then the ones that you can do after your academic program completes, so after you graduate. Let's look at those now. Can I see a raise of hands if we have any J1 students on our exchange visitors here with us today? Wonderful. Okay, I see you all. Great. Okay, so we have a few J1 students, so we'll go over J1 work authorization a bit as well for those of you who've joined us today. But of course, the majority of our students are F1, so we'll go a little bit more in depth regarding our F1 work authorization here. So types of employment for F1 or J1 students. Let's first go over during your program. During your program, F1 and J1 students can engage in on-campus work, okay? So on-campus employment, we'll go over what that means, but many of you are familiar with graduate student research positions, teaching assistantships, readers, graders, a lot of other on-campus positions where you're hired by a UC San Diego department. I know many of you might be starting an on-campus position actually this coming fall term as you begin your program, either through research or others. And so on-campus employment is something that you can do during your program. Curricular practical training, also known as CPT, is also something that you may engage in during your program of study. And this is particularly for paid off-campus work. So, you know, after your first year of study, you find a great summer internship with, let's say, Google or Facebook. These would require a type of work authorization through curricular practical training or CPT. Okay, again, we'll go over all of these types in depth a bit later. And of course, during your program, you can also engage in volunteer work and unpaid internships. So for our J1 students, you can engage in these same types of employment, and your work authorization will be known as pre-completion academic training. So J1 students, it's a bit easier to remember. You only have one kind, pre-completion academic training or on-campus employment. And so you can engage in those during your program of study. After you complete your program of study, you'll see here that there are actually only, there's only one type of employment that you can engage in as an F1 student after you complete your program of study. And many of you are familiar with this. This is referred to as optional practical training or OPT, okay? Once you complete your program of study, you're technically no longer an enrolled student. And so the type of work authorization that you have is actually an extension of your F1 status. It's not a different visa type. OPT is not a different visa. You're still maintaining your F1 visa, but you are now in a training phase or training period after you completed your program of study, and USCIS or US Immigration will authorize you to work either on campus, off campus, or in volunteer and unpaid internships during this extended OPT period time. So we'll talk about all of these types of work authorizations a bit more in depth, but just so that you can see a nice clear picture and table of what is available to you. I hope that you all understand that it does differ significantly depending on if you are a current student or once you've completed your program of study. So let's look at timeline. When can you start on-campus employment? When can you start off-campus employment? When can you start OPT? What do you need to do before you can do all that? So I know many of our graduate students are enrolled in master's programs, PhD programs, and the length of your program will differ, right? We have master's students who might have a 2-year master. Many of our Rady School of Management master students have maybe a shorter master's program. Our GPS students have a shorter master's program. Our PhD students have a 5, 6, 7-year program, hopefully not too long. But as you can see, because of program length, right, your timeline will look very different. However, the minimum amount of time that you do need to wait in order to engage in certain types of employment will remain the same. So let's take a look here. As soon as you begin your program and that you are physically here on campus here or in the US, you may start to engage in on-campus employment. Okay, so on-campus employment is permitted from day 1 of your program. This includes, again, GSRs, TAships, things like that, as long as you're hired by UC San Diego or its affiliates. Now, once you have enrolled for 3 quarters, so you can see here fall, winter, and spring, you can then start to look for and engage in off-campus internships through CPT. Okay. This is a bit different for our J1 students, and we'll go over your timeline separately, but for our F1 students, on-campus employment begins when you start your program. CPT or off-campus paid employment begins after 3 terms. Okay, you must first enroll in 3 terms on an active CVIS record, meaning you're physically here in the US for 3 quarters before you can start off-campus training. Okay. And then let's say you graduate fall of 2022, okay, really quickly, a 1-year program. You can apply for then a post-completion OPT, and that provides you with 12 to 36 months, depending if you're a STEM major, to work on campus in a non-student appointment position, or you can even work off campus. It depends on what you'd like to do, but it's a different period of time after you've graduated in which you can begin working. So you can see here post-completion OPT is after you complete your program of study. Okay. So before we go in depth regarding each type of authorization, I want to go over understanding the kinds of work authorization that you need before you start. So you can see this table here. It'll let you know what kind of authorization or authorization needed from. So who do you need authorization from? Okay, and then what kind of work authorization do you need? And also what kind of document would you need to show or that employer or that company or whoever it might be in order for you to show that you can legally work here in the US. So there are certain types of employment, such as on-campus, CPT, OPT, and they all differ when it comes to the type of work authorization that you will show. Some types of employment might not require any work authorization, so you don't need it. As long as you are maintaining your F1 or your J1 status, you may be eligible to accept certain types of employment incident to your status, meaning as long as you're here, you have you're in good standing, you're an enrolled student, you're maintaining your Form I-20 or Form DS 2019, you don't need authorization from our office or from US Immigration. You just need to show your Form I-20 or DS 2019, okay? There are other types of work authorization that require ISPO approval. So it will require approval from our office. And it will require a Form I-20 or a Form DS 2019 in good standing, and also written approval for your specific employment site and specific employment dates also shown on your Form I-20 or Form DS 2019. So when we say it requires ISPO approval, you need something on your I-20 saying you can work for a specific place, specific dates. Other types of approval or other types of employment authorization require ISPO recommendation plus USCIS approval. So this is for OPT after you complete your program of study, but ISPO will add something to your Form I-20 or Form DS your Form I-20 for F1 students, and then you do need to receive a additional document from US Immigration known as your EAD card in order to begin working. So this is, you don't need to remember any of this right now, but just so that you understand, different types of work authorization require a different level of approval from different individuals, and you need to show a different document in order to begin working. So really important, just note that you need to plan and understand this before you start working. Okay. So we have some really good questions in the chat. So thank you for continuing to submit those. I know Emily's also answered quite a bit. Please continue to submit those. We'll go ahead and we'll jump into our first type of work authorization here, known as on-campus employment. All right. So on-campus employment is defined as work on the school premise. You are employed by the I-20 issuing institution. So your I-20 issuing institution is UC San Diego. So UC San Diego should be the one employing you. Again, we described it as GSR work, TA-ship, or you can even work here on at the dining halls. You can work at Starbucks on campus, here at Price Center. You can work at Subway, anywhere here physically on campus. Okay. This third bullet, you can be employed by an on-campus commercial firm, such as restaurants in the Price Center, and that provide a direct student service, such as food or other things to students. You can also work at the bookstore, lots and lots of opportunities here on campus. Okay, we do have a few off-campus locations which are educationally affiliated with UC San Diego and may be considered on campus. However, those do require prior authorization from ISPO, so please do talk to us about on-campus employment if it's at an off-campus location. However, most of these are very straightforward. If it's on campus, you're providing a direct service to the student, you're being hired by UC San Diego or commercial firms on campus, it is considered on-campus work. Okay. So let's look at our first what would you do engagement box here. Is working at Starbucks at Price Center considered on-campus employment for international students? Go ahead and raise your hand if you think yes, working at Starbucks on campus is considered on-campus employment. Very good. I see lots and lots of hands go up. Wonderful. Yes, you're all right. Working at Starbucks at the Price Center is considered on-campus employment because it's physically on our campus. One thing I want to point out is if you are working for Starbucks as a barista off campus, so right across the way, we have the university, you have UTC, lots of shops, lots of great places to eat, lots of shopping. They also have a Starbucks in that shopping center. You cannot work at that Starbucks because it is not physically on campus. Okay, so you can work at that Starbucks maybe if you're in a different role or position, but to be a barista or to do other things at that specific Starbucks would not be allowed because it's not on campus. All right, great job. So let's look a little bit more about eligibility, hours you can work and so forth. On-campus employment here at UC San Diego is the only type of employment that does not need to be related to your program of study. So let's go back to your Starbucks example. I'm sure none of you are majoring in coffee making or being a barista. And so you may work at Starbucks through on-campus employment. It does not need to be related to your major of study. During the academic year, so fall, winter, and spring, you are limited to 20 hours per week, no more than 20 hours. However, during summer breaks and vacations, such as winter and spring break, you may work more than 20 hours. Okay. So now let's look at work authorization. What kind of work authorization do you need? F1 students do not need any type of work authorization. Your ability to work on campus is incident to status, meaning as long as you have a good I-20 in hand, you're maintaining your F1 status, you may go ahead and accept the on-campus employment position. Our J1 students, however, will need a permission letter. So this is authorized by ISPO, and many of you are familiar with our iPortal. We'll go over the iPortal later, but you can request a permission letter for our J1 students to work on campus directly from ISPO, and we can go ahead and we can authorize that for you. If you are engaging in paid employment, you may need a social security number if you don't already have one. I know we're going to have tons of questions about social security numbers, also known as SSNs. So we do talk about that a bit today as well. But just note, on-campus employment does not need to be related to your major. Part-time, which is 20 hours during the academic year, maybe full-time or more than 20 hours in summer and breaks. Note the kind of work authorization that you might need if you are a J1 student. And if it's paid, you will need a social security number. We're in very different times. And so on-campus employment has now been discussed as, okay, well, what if I do on-campus employment, but I'm working for my department remotely? Is that allowed? So yes, the Student and Exchange Visitor Program has permitted students who are engaged in on-campus employment to continue those positions off-campus remotely in a safe space, as long as their department is able to assess their work and work direction in an efficient manner. However, students who are physically outside of the US, if you're located outside of the US, you do need to work directly with your hiring department for that kind of arrangement. Things to consider is, how will you be compensated if you're physically outside of the US? You don't have a bank account necessarily. You don't hold F1 status because you're not physically here yet. Will you be in compliance with applicable income tax laws if you're abroad? You'll be subject to tax filing and payment mandates, not only here in the US, but also outside in your home country. So lots of complications with tax implications. ISPO, we are not tax professionals, so we will outsource any tax questions to some colleagues here on campus and also some other resources. But as you can tell, it can get a bit tricky if you're physically outside of the US. And again, if you don't have a social security number, it might be difficult for us to facilitate payment. So because of these things, please do work directly with your hiring department if you have questions about working on campus in an on-campus position, but you're physically outside of the US at this time or will be for the fall quarter. All right. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump in now into off-campus employment. All right. So off-campus employment is different, again, for F1 or J1 students. For those who are pursuing paid off-campus positions during their program of study, you will need to apply for a specific type of work authorization. For F1 students, this is known as Curricular Practical Training, or CPT. For our J1 students, this is known as Pre-Completion Academic Training, or AT. So let's go over our F1 CPT eligibility first. All right. So the first, there are certain boxes here that you can see. We'll talk about each one, but you need to meet all 5 of these boxes before you can pursue off-campus employment as an F1 student. The first is you need to have received an offer from your employer. Okay, so you should have already interviewed and entertained certain offers from possible employers for internships, off-campus training, and so forth. And they should have issued you an offer letter, a letter of employment. This is a basic letter that says, we are offering you a position to do this and this at our company. It will last for this amount of time. You will get paid this amount of time. Here's your supervisor's information. We have sample offer letters on our website so that you understand what that might look like. So 1, you must have received an offer from an employer. Box 2, you should receive credit or enroll in a cooperative program that allows you to engage in this internship. So you can think of your internship and CPT during your program as linked to quarters because you will need to enroll in a course every quarter during the academic year, except for the summer where you may be eligible to enroll in a cooperative program in lieu of registering for a class. But you must receive credit for the off-campus internship or opportunities that you are pursuing. So this requires that you enroll in a CPT class. The third box is that you must hold an active CVIS record. Your Form I-20 must have been activated or registered. So let's take a minute to talk about what that means. When we say that you have an active CVIS record, it means that you have began your program, you are enrolled full-time, and you're physically located here in the US. Okay. To have an active CVIS record, you must have submitted a specific form to us in the iPortal known as the check-in for I-20 or DS 2019 activation. Once that form is submitted in iPortal, we will go ahead and activate your CVIS record once you upload certain documents saying that you physically arrived to the US, you're enrolled full-time, and so forth. So you must have an active CVIS record. Okay. I'm going to jump to this box here. Work is related to your program of study. So this is unlike our on-campus employment. On-campus employment, you could work at Starbucks, no problem, right? However, for off-campus employment, if you're working at an off-site location, through CPT, it must be directly related to your specific program of study. Okay. We're not going to ask you specifically, well, you're a computer science major, so tell me, here's a list of computer science jobs. Does it fit one of these? You are going to have to explain to us what you are doing in your program of study, what you're learning in your classes, how is it applicable? How are you applying yourself in this specific internship that you've obtained? So you need to make that connection very clearly. Okay, and this gray box here, this is the 1 academic year requirement. You must have enrolled full-time for at least 3 quarters on the same active CVIS ID number in active status. Okay, so we'll talk about this a bit. What does it mean to meet the 1 academic year requirement in active status? And also CPT is authorized by ISPO. So you will need something notated on the second page of your Form I-20 showing that we authorize you to work for a very specific company for a very specific period of time. So you must have checked off all of these 5 boxes before you are eligible to apply for and engage in CPT or off-campus paid employment. For our J1 students, really briefly here, you should also have received your offer of employment. You should also be in an internship class. You should have a CVIS record, and forgive my typo here, this should say Form DS 2019. You should also be enrolled in a, your employment should also be directly related to your program, and you have a shorter minimum because your minimum is only 1 quarter. It is not 3 quarters. This is strictly being because many of our J1 students are here for a shorter period of time on exchange programs. Okay, again, AT is also authorized by ISPO. So on your Form I-20, on the second page, there is a box called Employment Information there. And this is actually where we will list your CPT authorization for F1 students. It will list your exact employer's name, and the dates you were authorized to work for that employer. You may not begin employment until you receive your Form I-20 in your hand with that specific employment listed there on page 2. So it's really important. You just don't start working. You need to obtain this document from our office first. Okay, there it is. Okay, for our J1 students, you'll also have a similar place here where it might show your work authorization in that second yellow box. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's jump into the 1 academic year requirement. So for our F1 students, you must have enrolled for 3 quarters on an active CVIS record, meaning you're physically here. So for our fall grads, or for our fall admits, you may have to enroll for fall of 2021, winter of 2022, and then spring of 2022 before you can then engage in off-campus internships through CPT in the summer of 2022. There are other ways to have already met the one academic year requirement. So we'll go over those briefly here. If you have already, if you have transferred your CVIS record to UC San Diego, meaning perhaps you pursued your undergraduate program at UCLA, and now you're starting a master's program here at UC San Diego, you might have retained that same exact CVIS ID number. If the CVIS ID number that UC San Diego issues you matches the exact same CVIS ID number that UCLA issued you, and you can locate that on the top of your Form I-20, then that indicates that we have transferred your CVIS record. As long as you have enrolled in 3 quarters on that same active CVIS record, you are eligible to engage in off-campus internships through CPT. So the 3 quarters could have been accrued at UCLA and in your undergraduate program, which means you might be eligible to engage in off-campus internships earlier in your program here at UC San Diego. You may have also changed your status, meaning you had a different non-immigrant visa type, such as H4, H1, L1, E2, and so forth. So if you recently changed to F1 status, you can count the time spent in a different status enrolled full-time towards your one academic year requirement as well. And of course, if you're changing academic level, so you did your undergraduate program here at UC San Diego, you're now doing a master's program or a PhD program. And again, if you retain that same CVIS ID number, then you should be eligible to count any of that time towards the one academic year requirement. So again, here's an illustration of what that might look like. If you arrive here in the fall quarter, your CVIS record is activated in the fall. So fall is Q1, winter is Q2, spring is Q3. You can start doing CPT in summer of 2022. All right. Okay, so we're going to go into working after graduation. And this is different, right? Because as we reviewed earlier in our presentation, there's only one type of authorization that you will need if you are an F1 student and you are working after your program of study, and this is known as optional practical training. So our F1 students, after they complete their program of study, they are eligible for up to 12 months of optional practical training. And if you're a STEM major, you may be eligible for an additional 24-month extension. We'll talk about the type of work authorization that you'll need in order to apply for OPT. For our J1 students, your authorization length will vary depending on your current program length. And yours is known as post-completion academic training, so still academic training. So let's look at eligibility for OPT for F1 students first. So again, here are our boxes, but you will see that this first box here, instead of saying that you need an offer letter from an employer, you'll notice that that's not one of our boxes, okay? When you are applying for work authorization for OPT after you complete your program of study, you do not need to have an employer. So you can just apply for OPT and you will have time during the pending OPT process, and even after OPT is approved, you'll have time to seek employment, look for the right employer, and start working. So that's one of the really big myths about OPT students ask, do I need an offer letter right away? No, you do not. You can go ahead and apply even without an offer. However, this box is replaced with a note regarding location. In order to apply for OPT, you must be physically present inside of the US at the time of filing your OPT application, okay? The second box is you must be in a very specific time frame known as your OPT application window when you apply. This is a 5-month window which rotates around your last date of enrollment, or for graduate students, perhaps your comprehensive exam or defense date. So this 5-month window is 90 days before that last date of enrollment or comp or defense date, and then no later than 60 days after. So you can see it's about 90 days before, 60 days after. There's this 5-month window in which you can apply for OPT. The next one is, again, you need to have an active CVIS record. You must have an active CVIS record at the time of applying, and you must also have met the 1 academic year requirement. Any work that you do after your program of study must be directly related to your program of study. So very similar to CPT, except you don't need an offer letter here. Work authorization for OPT is different from CPT. In order to apply for OPT, you will receive a recommendation by ISPO, and this will also be on the second page of your Form I-20. You'll see it there, but you will take that OPT I-20 and you will actually submit it to US Immigration or US CIS. They will be the ones to process it for you and provide you with what's called an employment authorization document. So as you can see, OPT authorization is a bit more complicated and it requires a few additional steps in addition to what we described for CPT. Okay. For academic training for our J1 students, you must apply prior to your program end date. Okay. You must also hold an active CVIS record. You must have enrolled for 1 quarter. And again, your work has to be related to your program of study. J1 academic training for post-completion academic training is also authorized by ISPO. So actually a much simpler process for our J1 students to apply for work after they complete their program of study. Okay, and here's an illustration of OPT. So during your program, you can see here in yellow, right, you're enrolled, and then these three check marks here indicate that you've met the 3-quarter 1 academic year requirement or 3 quarters on an active CVIS record. You've graduated in spring of 2021, and then you can then engage in post-completion OPT. So here's the next what would you do box. Go ahead and raise your hand. I can continue to work on CPT even after I graduate and complete my program. How many of you think that, yes, you can engage in CPT after you graduate? Okay, not too many hands, which is a great sign. So CPT, again, as a reminder, you can only do CPT during your program. So once you've completed your last date of enrollment, you can no longer engage in CPT. You will need to then seek authorization for OPT if you'd like to start employment or continue employment after you've graduated, after you completed your program. All right, great. Good job, everybody. Okay. I'm gonna watch this quick video with you all here.
Now that I have a social security card, I can work anywhere, anytime.
Okay, let's see your hands. If you have a social security card, do you think you can work anywhere, anytime? Very good. So not too many hands raised, which is a good thing. So let's talk about social security numbers. What is a social security number? Why do you need it? How can you get it? Can you use it to work anywhere, anytime? Okay. So a social security number is a 9-digit identification number assigned by the United States government that is used for tax reporting purposes. It's required for F1 or J1 students who will be earning money in the US. Okay. When you receive this specific card, there will be a notation on it that says, not a form of work authorization, which means that you need to have valid employment authorization from the Department of Homeland Security or from ISPO, from USCIS. Basically, you need to have work authorization that you match with your social security number in order to use it. Okay. So just because you have a social security number does not mean that you can go around and start accepting positions. You need to have it paired always with proper work authorization. Now, a lot of processes here in the US, such as applying for a driver's license, renting an apartment, buying a car, buying a house, all of those things, they will usually ask for your social security number. So we have a lot of students ask, how can I get this number? As an F1 or a J1 student, okay, you cannot apply for a social security number unless you are authorized to work in a paid position. So on-campus employment, if you have an on-campus employment opportunity and they are paying you, we may then support your application to apply for a social security number. However, if you're just saying, hey, I need to rent an apartment, they're asking for an SSN, can you give me one? Can you help me get one? Unfortunately, no. You can only apply for an SSN if you are engaged in a paid position. So the second bullet here, you must first have work authorization from UC San Diego, so on-campus employment, F1 CPT or J1 AT, or if you've graduated, then OPT in order to apply for your SSN. Okay. Your social security number is issued by the Social Security Administration Office, also known as the SSA, which is located in downtown San Diego, I think, is the main branch. There's a couple other branches here in San Diego. However, ISPO, our office, UC San Diego, does not issue you a social security number, okay? However, we do issue you a specific support letter, which you can then take with you to the Social Security Administration office, and you can then apply for your social security number. We have a great website, and Emily can share this in the chat about how to find more information about your social security number, when you can apply, timeline, and so forth. But what's really important to note is that your social security number is not the same thing as work authorization. You will always need both a social security number plus work authorization through on-campus employment, CPT, AT, or OPT in order to legally work here in the US in paid positions. Okay. One last thing to note regarding social security numbers, once you're issued one, it's yours for life. So it doesn't expire. You'll keep it and you'll use that same social security number each time you apply for CPT, on-campus employment, or any other types of benefits. That one number will be yours to keep. Okay. So we're almost towards the end here, and then I think we'll have enough time for questions. Now that you know a bit about the types of work authorization that you can engage in, where should you start? What resources, should you start researching and looking at before you can start looking at employment? And anytime you want to apply for support letters to get your social security number, the support letter for your social security number, CPT authorization, academic training authorization, OPT recommendations, any of those things, you will always log into ISPO's iPortal. So many of you are familiar with ISPO's online document request system, iportal.ucsd.edu. You'll locate the correct service and submit that request there. We have a wonderful career center here on campus, and even a designated career advisor by the name of Karen Gosher, who is designated to helping serve our international student populations and helping them navigate these really difficult concepts such as work authorization, but also finding great opportunities on campus and off campus. They'll even help you with resumes, cover letters, virtual interviews. They'll help you find very specific research opportunities and employment opportunities specifically in your field of study. And we also have great resource fairs, networking events, and planning tools for our graduate students. So please do visit career.ucsd.edu. Such great resources available at your fingertips. And there's just some job search tools here that I want to mention, such as Handshake, Going Global, external job search portals such as LinkedIn and Indeed that our Career Center has available for you. So please do visit our Career Center on campus or their website as well. Some last minute resources and tips before we go into Q&A. Your department and your faculty. Many of our graduate students, especially our PhD students, many of them do postdocs here at UC San Diego. So they'll continue their research, continue working, they'll start teaching on campus. And that really starts from the beginning, from making connections, making great impressions with our departments, with our faculty. So stay connected with your department and with your faculty advisors. Really make sure that you are maintaining that relationship so that you can see what comes of it after completion of your program. because a lot of our postdocs really do start, from the beginnings of their programs. Okay, another one again is Career Center. So we have Karen Dosher, who is a great resource. You can contact Karen here. Her email and her information is there. And then lastly, our iwork.ucsd.edu website. So I know we covered quite a bit of information today, and I don't expect any of you to memorize any of this, but please do visit iwork.ucsd.edu and other websites such as cpt.ucsd.edu, opt.ucsd.edu, at.ucsd.edu. Really easy, quick ways to remember these vanity links to talk about the types of work authorization and learn more. But learn more on ISPO's website. We have a lot of resources available to you. All right, so I think we've reached the end of the presentation here. So I hope that you all found that helpful. Let's go ahead and let's take some questions now.
All right, thanks, Pauline. So yeah, I think we have some good questions here that I wanted to save that I thought might be good for everyone to hear. And I mean, some of them were already answered, but maybe just to clarify. So questions about not being able to use CPT until after your first year at UCSD. Can you clarify the academic year requirement?
Yes, so it's a great question. Yes, it's true. You cannot engage in CPT until you have already enrolled for one academic year. So this is known as the one academic year requirement. And it's not necessarily a full year. It's 3/4 on that same active CVIS ID number. So you need to first enroll 3/4 active CVIS record, meaning you're physically here in the US enrolled full-time before you can start any type of off-campus employment through CPT. For our fall 21 admits, if you start your program this fall quarter, if you're physically here, you start accruing time towards that one academic year requirement as of fall quarter. It's Q1. Winter 22 is Q2. Spring 22 is Q3, meaning the earliest you'd be able to engage in off-campus employment through CPT is summer of 2022. Great question. Let's go to the next one.
Perfect. Question about volunteer work. Can a student volunteer without getting paid off campus?
Yes. So we have a lot of resources. If you want to share a website on volunteering in the US, sure. Volunteer work is very specifically defined by the Department of Labor, and it really does go into humanitarian causes, religious causes. Going to the beach, picking up trash, cleaning the earth. These are defined as more volunteer humanitarian efforts. And so for those types of opportunities, yes, you don't need any type of work authorization. You can go ahead and you can engage in those. That's no problem. However, the Department of Labor has a really good website about determining if the type of volunteer position you are engaging in is actually a volunteer position. So I want to be clear about volunteering and working without pay. They're very different. If you're going to say, oh, well, I haven't met my one academic year requirement, but I really, really want to work for this company, I'll just volunteer for them until I can finally meet my one academic year requirement and start getting paid through CPT. That is a big no-no, okay? If that position should have paid you to begin with, doing the type of work that you're doing, then technically you may be engaged in unauthorized employment. So it's really, really important to note that you can't just work for free or work without pay. Those are not considered volunteer positions. All right, and next question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, I did put in the chat just for everyone the volunteer website and then also our SSN page, which there were a lot of questions about specifically if they have a stipend, are they eligible for SSN? If they have a fellowship, can you talk about that?
Sure. So yes, our students who are receiving fellowships or stipends, technically that's considered on-campus employment. So you would just need some sort of letter from our office. You can apply through iportal.ucsd.edu. For a Social Security support letter, and you'll upload proof of stipend, proof of fellowship, proof of on-campus employment, and you may apply for a Social Security number.
Perfect. Okay. And then one more maybe related to SSN. Can they get an SSN to apply for a driver's license? The DMV told them they might need one.
That's a good question. So again, you cannot apply for a social security number unless you are authorized to engage in paid employment. So if you have on-campus employment or if you're engaged in CPT, then yes, you can apply for a social security number. But if it's for the sole purpose of applying for a DM, for a driver's license, and they're asking for your DM, for your social security number, we would not be able to provide you with a support letter. You would not be eligible to apply for a social security number since, you know, you're not engaging in any type of paid employment.
All right. Okay, a couple questions about if you can go over again the credit versus summer co-op program for CPT.
Okay, so for our graduate students in the summer term, so summer of 2022, next summer, we have two types of options for those who want to engage in summer internships. The first is CPT with course enrollment, and the second is CPT through our summer cooperative education program. So CPT with course enrollment is exactly what it is. You'll apply for CPT work authorization and also enroll in a summer session course. So you'll be receiving credit for the CPT authorization during the summer through that course. Our CPT through the summer cooperative education program, this is in lieu of registration. So it's a very specific program that we've designed that incorporates a bit of, you know, goal working and goal reaching and evaluation, where you have to kind of evaluate your training program between you, a faculty, and your employer during the summer. And at the end of the summer, you submit something to ISPO, verifying that during the summer you've met the goals of the training program. The benefit of the summer co-op program is that you don't need to enroll in any units, which might be nice because you won't have to pay for a summer course, or your department might not have to enroll you in anything during the summer. But the summer cooperative education program is only available to students who are continuing into the fall 2022 quarter. So if summer of 2022 is your last quarter, you will need to do CPT in the summer using course enrollment. You would not be eligible for the co-op program. You want to add anything to that, Em?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay, a question about do they need to be physically present in the US even during the breaks to be eligible to work off campus for CPT?
It's a good question. So CPT work authorization, the student and exchange visitor program has permitted students to engage in remote positions for CPT. This will really depend on you and your employer. So if, let's say, your employer is Facebook, and you let Facebook know, hey, I'm going to go home for the summer, spend time with my family. Can I continue CPT while outside of the US? That's a discussion between you and your employer, because technically they are now hiring an individual located in a foreign country, not necessarily an F1 student who is here in the US. So when you're on CPT, if you're physically located in a different place, that's a conversation you should have ahead of time before you leave. Or before you depart the US, have that conversation with your employer, because each employer is different, and they may permit it, they may not, or they may need to make some adjustments to your current work agreement.
Great, thanks. Okay, sorry, there's so many good questions. I probably can take a couple more. So let me find some that a lot of students asked.
Sure.
So I know we didn't cover it today, but maybe a couple of people are asking just for a brief overview of STEM OPT.
Oh, I'm going to have you do that.
Okay, so the STEM OPT extension, it's the extension of OPT, is if you apply and are approved for that initial 12 months of OPT after you complete your degree, and you are in a STEM degree, and how that is determined is by the zip code on your I-20, which is the number right next to where the major is. And there's a certain list, if you Google STEM zip codes, you'll find a list of zip codes that are, I can put in the chat, but that are eligible for STEM. So I mean, typically it's all, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. But so if you're in that, if you're one of those codes, then you're eligible for an extension of your 1 year of OPT. So it's a 2-year extension. At the time you apply, you do have to have a job offer or already a job. It has to be paid, and there's some other requirements of the employer. And And you're eligible for 2 STEM OPT extensions. So if you get, a master's and do OPT and then STEM OPT and then get your PhD, you potentially would be eligible for OPT and another STEM extension if it's another STEM degree. So that's kind of a very basic overview, but you can definitely take a look at our STEM OPT website to get more of an idea. Okay, let's see. Let's maybe do one more question. Okay, I like this one. Is shadowing considered volunteering? Can I shadow a doctor off campus with no CPT?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've gotten that one before.
Yeah.
Shadowing. I think so. I think it would actually be permitted. So you have to kind of think about the work that you're doing, right? Like, what are you doing on site? Are you displacing somebody else who might actually be paid for that employment or who might be appointed to a specific position? So if you're following, a physician around the hospital to just observe their work, I think that's, experiential learning, in which case you're not being compensated for it. There's no type of work authorization. There's no agreement between you and that physician to, you report on certain hours, you do these things for the physician. So I don't think so if it's just shadowing. What do you think, Emily?
I would agree. Yeah, that is an interesting question that I don't think we've been asked very often, but that sounds like a good kind of creative way to, get experience if you're looking into different things, but without necessarily, if you're not getting paid and like Pauline's saying, it's not, no one else is getting paid for the same position. I think it wouldn't require CPT.
All right, great. Okay, these are great questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so I know there's more questions that we weren't able to get to, but again, you can submit that iContact page or email us, come to advising, and we can answer your questions. A few final reminders. Please continue to register for other orientation sessions by visiting iorientation.ucsd.edu. At the end of this session, you'll get an email with a survey. And filling out the survey is how we verify your attendance at this workshop and how you'll fulfill your 2 minimum requirements. So please fill it out. You can stay up to date by visiting iupdates.ucsd.edu and by checking your UC San Diego email for weekly ISPO newsletters. So make sure you check those. And lastly, you can always contact ISPO at icontact.ucsd.edu and follow us on social media. All right, so thank you all for attending today's session. Again, whether you're joining us from inside of the US or from the other side of the world, on behalf of the International Students and Programs Office here at UC San Diego, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning. Have a great fall quarter, and we'll see you at our next session. Thank you.